What do you know about the destroying angel of Mormondom? This is Orrin Porter Rockwell, also known as Porter Rockwell, or modern day Samson, after Joseph Smith told him that no harm would befall him if he didn't cut his hair. He is essentially known as a true believer of a cult. He works hard by hauling wood in a cart and gathering berries to help pay and fund Joseph Smith's translation of the Golden Plates. He's baptized into the LDS Church at the age of 16 in 1830. He's some of the first people to be baptized into Mormonism. Porter Rockwell served as the personal bodyguard to Joseph Smith until he was killed in 1844. Afterwards, he served as the bodyguard for Brigham Young. And as he moved westward with the Mormons into Missouri, there were growing tensions between Mormons and non-Mormons in the state. The reason for this tension is largely anecdotal, but Mormons were considered an out-group who was growing larger in political influence. They were believed and often accused of not following local laws and regulations, and they were also considered strange because they would come into Missouri and then claim land that people already owned. So if you're a person who has settled into Missouri and you have started a ranch or farm on this property that you own, and then someone tells you that God will give you your land to them, that is concerning. Now, it's not entirely black and white, however, because Mormons were also chided by native Missourians for being more anti-slavery than they were. This came to a head in 1833 when a Mormon newspaper by the name of the Evening and Morning Star published two articles concerning slavery. This was taken by native Missourians as an affront. They believed that it meant that they wanted more freedmen to come down to the state. And so an angry mob formed and they destroyed the printing press of the newspaper. Now, in 1831, Joseph Smith also declares that Jackson County, Missouri will be the site of a new Jerusalem, and so he instructs his followers to move there to build a new city of Zion. By 1833, about 1,200 Mormons are living in Jackson County, and this begins to be perceived as a threat by other people, mainly because of the abolitionist beliefs that they hold. By 1834, most, if not all, of the Mormons in the county are expelled, and so Joseph Smith starts Zion's Camp, a military expedition of about 200 people marching from Kirtland, Ohio, to retake Jackson County for the Mormons. The expedition is unsuccessful. Joseph Smith is unable to negotiate and he's unwilling to use force, and there's also a cholera outbreak that ultimately stymies its effectiveness. So you can see the rise of tensions between Mormons and non-Mormons, and more non-Mormons start calling for the expulsion of Mormons from the state of Missouri. On August 6, 1838, on Election Day, a group of about 25 to 30 Mormons are denied voting rights in Davis County, which leads to a fight between Mormons, non-Mormons, as well as a fraternal group of Mormons known as the Danites. On September 20th, 1838, a group of about 150 vigilantes ride into the town of DeWitt, and they demand the Mormons leave in 10 days. On October 1st, they start burning down buildings and they seal off the town, waiting for Governor Lilburn Boggs to aid them. On October 9th, Governor Boggs declares that the Mormons and the mob must settle the differences themselves, and ultimately the Mormons agree to leave and they move to Caldwell County. So again, you see a rise of tensions here. In response to this, three different Mormon leaders begin attacking settlements themselves. Lyman White attacks the settlement of Millport, David W. Patton attacks the settlement of Gallatin, and Seymour Brunson attacks the settlement of Grindstone Fork. Contemporary accounts state that they largely would loot people's homes then set the buildings on fire, and one person stated that they could see every building in front of them being set in flames. Fellow Mormon John Corrill wrote here in 1839, "The love of pillage grew upon them very fast, for they plundered every kind of property they could get a hold of." On October 25, 1838, David W. Patton's men encounter the Missouri militia at Crooked River. Upon hearing what they believe to be a gunfiring, the militia fires upon the Mormons, killing their scout O'Banion in the process. Patton orders his men to charge, screaming for God and liberty in the process, and he is killed as a result of this. This is known as the Battle of the Crooked River. Upon hearing this, Governor Boggs believes, given the exaggerated accounts he receives of the battle, that Mormons are in open revolt. So he signs an extermination order against the Mormons, declaring that they need to leave the state. A few days later, 17 Mormons are killed in what is known as the Hans Mill Massacre, done in retaliation for previously mentioned events. Joseph Smith arrives in far west Missouri under the guise of negotiating with a man known as General Lucas. However, upon meeting with Lucas, Lucas claims that he has officially surrendered, and because of this, he orders Joseph Smith and several other Mormons to be court-martialed. They are sentenced to death by execution. However, the person carrying out the order refuses to do it, and his life is spared. Joseph Smith is then later put in jail, and then it is believed that he is allowed to escape. And then the Mormons moved to Nauvoo, Illinois. Now, I haven't mentioned Porter Rockwell very much, but the reason for that is because I'm trying to explain to you why there was such bad blood between Missourians, Lilburn Boggs, and Mormons, specifically Joseph Smith. There was a lot of tension and violence that happened throughout this period over the course of several years. Now, in 1841 in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith declares that Lilburn Boggs will meet his end via violence. And then suddenly, Porter Rockwell leaves the state for undisclosed reasons. John C. Bennett writes that upon asking where Porter Rockwell is going, Joseph Smith replies, "To fulfill prophecy." On May 6, 1842, a man by the name of Mr. Brown goes to a gun shop in Independence, Missouri. He observes a small firearm and then he leaves. Later that day, as Lilburn Boggs is reading his newspaper, a shot rings out, hitting him in the jaw. He falls to his floor and his family rushes over to see him. The assailant leaves the gun behind. The same gun that was being seen by a Mr. Brown. That Mr. Brown being later revealed to be identified as Orrin Porter Rockwell. If you want to hear more about this in greater detail, I recommend the podcast Legends of the Old West. They have a great series on this. Lilburn Boggs survives the assassination attempt, and Porter Rockwell is put in prison for 10 months under suspicion, but he's never convicted. He returns to Nauvoo and regroups with the Mormons, eventually following them to Utah following the death of Joseph Smith, now being the personal bodyguard for Brigham Young. Throughout the rest of his life, Porter Rockwell would often be accused of and associated with the murder and disappearance of various people, one instance being Frank Worrell, the leader of the group of men responsible for killing Joseph Smith. There's also the memoir by William Wild Bill Hickman published in 1872, where he claimed that he and Rockwell both carried out the extrajudicial murder of multiple people for Brigham Young. An example of this would be Richard Yates, an apostate who mysteriously disappeared in Utah in 1857. Another instance, and the only confirmed person to have died by the hand of Porter Rockwell, would be Lot Huntington, an outlaw who was part of a gang accused of stagecoach robbery that Porter Rockwell shot in 1862. Contemporary accounts, however, from the 1850s and 60s claim that people who spoke out against Brigham Young sometimes disappeared and never returned, attributing that to Porter Rockwell. In 1863, he would work with the United States Army as a guide in Idaho, where they would later commit the Bear River Massacre, killing about 400 Shoshone and Bannock people. In 1869, Vice President Schuyler Colfax is giving a speech in Salt Lake City, Utah, defending the federal government's decision to ban polygamy. During this speech, he labels Porter Rockwell as a killer, to which Porter Rockwell reportedly raises his finger at the vice president, saying, "I never killed anyone who didn't need killing." Porter Rockwell would later be indicted by a grand jury for the Aiken Massacre, however he would die in 1878 before seeing a trial. We officially know that he is responsible for the death of Lot Huntington in 1862, however it is believed that he has killed as many as 10, 20, or more people, we just don't know for sure. Hence the nickname, the Destroying Angel of Mormondom.